Well, praise the Lord for that. And I tell you what, I am thankful for His faithfulness to me. Even when I'm not faithful to Him, He is faithful to me morning by morning. I hope you echo that as well through our time of worship this morning. And if you will be making your way to the Gospel of Luke chapter number 8 this morning. Luke chapter number 8. Previously, together we saw and we continue to see the works and the ministry of Jesus firsthand, of what is transpiring and taking place. And every week it seems like something more remarkable than the previous week takes place. And last week specifically, together we looked at how Jesus took a demon-possessed man and cast out the unclean spirits, and not just that by itself, but cast them out into a group of swine. And that group of swine decided that they would rather be dead than to be consumed by unclean spirits, and ran right into the lake. And so we saw a very great illustration, a great picture of the ministry of Jesus there. But if you might also recall, when we left off last week, even in the midst of all that, we kind of left with the people asking, instructing Jesus to depart from them, okay? And I'm sure it was a strong, almost borderline demand on their behalf. And so they asked Jesus, after the great that He had done for them and for the people, and especially for the instance there with the demon-possessed man, they said, Jesus, you're going to have to leave. This is just too much. You're going to have to depart from us. And so where we pick up this morning is Jesus has departed from them, and we're going to move on to another instance that we will see this morning. I want to preach to you on this subject today: burdens from the broken. Burdens from the broken. Beginning in verse number 40, in just a moment we're going to read this text. And as we do, we're going to see two burdens from two different individuals. These individuals could not be any more different. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But we see that they each have their own burden, and it's intermingled in this one text today. So if you will, pick up with me in verse number 40, and we will finish out chapter 8 this morning. So it was when Jesus returned, okay, He's returning here to Capernaum, that the multitude welcomed Him, for they were all waiting for Him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at the feet of Jesus, and he begged Him to come into his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians, and could not be healed by any, it came from behind him, touched the border of the hem of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" And when all denied it, Peter and those with him said, "Master, the multitudes thronged and pressed against you, and you said, 'Who touched me?' But Jesus said, 'Someone touched me, and I perceived power going out from me.' Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, falling down before Him. And she declared to Him in the presence of all the people the reason that she had touched Him, and how she was healed immediately." Verse 48. And He said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And while He was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to Him, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher." But when Jesus heard it, in verse 50, He answered him, saying, "Do not be afraid, only believe. She will be made well." And when He came into the house, He permitted that no one go in except Peter, James, John, and the father and the mother of the girl. And now all, verse 52 says, all wept and mourned for her. But he said, "Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." Then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately. And he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. Let's pray. Dear Father, I ask this morning, God, as we see two individual but two very powerful messages amongst one, God, may we be reminded this morning of your goodness to us. God, may we be reminded this morning, Father, that there will be times in this life where we carry a burden. God, that time may be now for some of us. Lord, we may feel like the pressure, we may feel like the weight, we may feel like the burden is too much to carry. God, that time for others may be in the future. God, that time for some may have already come and gone, Lord, and you have proclaimed victorious through that. Father, no matter when the time is, Lord, no matter how heavy, how severe the burden is, God, may we know today that you are the one that can lift that burden from us. God, that you are the only one that can take care of our most severe problems. God, you're the only one that can satisfy our slightest of problems today. Lord, and I pray amongst every person in this room today, God, that whatever it is that be a weight on our shoulder, may we bring it to you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Burdens from the broken. As I mentioned, we see two individual stories here, but they happen to be amongst the same time. They happen to be taking place at the very same time. And so that's why we read about them together. And we're going to see three burdens this morning through this message. Three burdens that I want to show you. And if you're here this morning, or maybe you're watching online, you're like, what exactly would constitute as a burden? What does that word burden mean? That word burden is simply, as I mentioned through prayer and through the introduction, is just a weight that is on your shoulders. It is something that you are carrying with you, in which you might have anxiety for, you might have stress for, you might have uncertainty in your life that is a burden to you. Now, sometimes we carry these burdens concerning ourselves, right? We have things in our own life that are going on that are a burden to us. Other times we have things that are going on in people that we love in their life that is a burden to us, and we are carrying that burden for other individuals. Regardless of what that is, we all have to deal with burdens through our life. And so my prayer this morning is that we see this example that's been given to us by these individuals today, and we take it and we apply it to when we are carrying the burden. Some people have carried burdens in their life that they never would have imagined. Sometimes a burden is forced upon you. You know, when you think about unfortunate circumstances that happen in children's lives, where they lose a parent or something of that nature, and they have a burden that is with them for the remaining of their childhood up till adulthood and so on. So sometimes you don't get to choose what's given to you, but that burden is one that we have in common. So I want to show you these three burdens. The first one that I want to show you this morning, verses 40 through 42, is a public burden. A public burden. Verse number 41. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at the feet of Jesus, and he begged him to come into his house. Now, the first, with this public burden that we see here, we meet a man named Jairus. And if you're familiar with this story, you might be aware of this already, but he was, as given to us in the text here, a ruler of the synagogue. The reason this is a public burden is because Jairus was a public official. He was a man of the public. He would have been known by many that were around. He was the ruler of the synagogue. Everybody would have known him. They may not have known him on a personal friendship type level, but they certainly would have known who he was and what he did. And they almost also certainly would have known, had there been any situation like this or circumstance like this where he would have a daughter that is approaching death here. And so this man Jairus here, this public figure, this leader of the synagogue, he knows, or as we see here, that many would have known that Jesus was coming back because it says they were waiting on him. So he, like those, would have come to the place to where he would have been waiting for Jesus to arrive back. And as Jesus arrives back, he meets Jesus. Now, there's something special about that, because we live in a place in our lives where we are very blessed and we are very fortunate. And what we tend to do in our lives is we wait for Jesus to come to us. We like for Jesus to come to us. Instead, what we should be doing is we should be coming to Jesus. We say, well, Jesus, I'll wait for you to, show me this. Or Lord, I'll wait on this. And that's great patience. But, sometimes before that even takes place, we've wasted, 6 months because we haven't even brought it to Jesus yet. We could have already been bringing it to Jesus. And so instead of waiting for Jesus to come to us, sometimes we need to go to Jesus. We need to go to Him. And that's exactly what Jairus does. He has a burden that is on his shoulders, and he knows that he needs to bring it to Jesus. And he falls down at Jesus' feet, and he begs him to come to his house. Now, if that's not, and there's a lot that goes into this, and I'll try my very best to explain it to you here. But this would have been a great burden for Jesus, right? For Jairus. To have a 12-year-old daughter, here's Jairus, 12-year-old little girl that is on the brink of death. A great burden this would have been. And so Jairus, he comes to Jesus. Verse 49 later on tells us that he's going to get a report. There's going to be a report that comes from the synagogue. So that helps us to know that a lot of people did know about this. A lot of people were keeping aware of the situation. It's like, it's like the snow situation right now, okay? Everybody's like watching it, like getting, up. I'm surprised we're not getting notifications on our phones right now. Bing, bing, bing. Like it seems like every 30 minutes the weather forecast is changing, right? So, they're just like we're keeping our attention on what the weather is going to do. Listen, they would have been very focused on this situation in the matter of Jairus. They would have been very focused on, hey, what's the latest? Have you heard anything about his daughter? I know she's been sick. I know she hasn't been doing well. Have you heard anything yet? So many are aware of what's going on. Now, Jairus, being a leader of the synagogue, would have made him a devout Jew. It would have made him coming to Jesus a little bit of a situation for him. It would have put him in a peculiar place, because coming to Jesus would have been something that those that are closest to Jairus would not have assumed that he would have done. It would not have been something that they would have said, oh, can you believe that Jairus went down and brought this to Jesus today? Because of his place and because of his position as the leader of the synagogue. So Jairus knew that coming to Jesus might cause a little bit of backlash. It might cause a little bit of rumblings amongst the group to say, can you believe he did that? Can you believe that he decided to take this matter to Jesus? That this man that is the proclaimed Messiah, can you believe that he has done this? All while, everything else they had already said about Jesus, can you believe he's taking this to the man that teaches on the Sabbath? And can you believe that he's taking this to the man that, that they are rumbling about, and they are trying to plot against already up to this point. They've got their eye very close on Jesus and every little thing that he does. Can you believe that Jairus has now brought this matter to him? But see, Jairus understood something that they didn't understand. He understood that Jesus was the only one that could take care of this problem. Even though I'm sure Jairus had all kinds of people bringing him all kinds of opinions and see this physician and every home remedy that existed at the time, if there was any. Jairus, do this. Jairus, do that. Jairus, try this. Jairus, try that. And Jairus just finally said, hey, I'm going to go to Jesus. Thank you. Appreciate it. Love you. But I'm going to take my matter to Jesus. That needs to be our very same attitude, church. We have a lot of things that we take to a lot of different people, and in reality, we need to just take them to Jesus. And that's where it needs to stop. Take them to Jesus. Now, there's nothing wrong with seeking advice, seeking wisdom, but when you begin to weigh people's opinion over the facts of Jesus, it can become a distracted situation for you. It can become a situation where you find yourself on the wrong path sooner rather than later. So Jairus brings this public burden to Jesus, a burden that everyone would have been aware about. And verse 42 tells us that Jesus, after Jairus brought this to him, it says that he had only one daughter of 12 years and she was dying, but it says that the multitude had thronged them. And what happens is Jesus says, okay, I will go. He agrees to go with Jairus to his house. That's the public burden. The second thing I want you to see this morning is a private burden, beginning in verse number 43. Now a woman, having a flow of blood for 12 years, who has spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any. So secondly, we see a private burden this morning. While Jairus' was very public, while everyone was very aware of the situation, while everyone was very clear on what was going on in the life of Jairus and his daughter, then we see in verse 43 a woman appear in the midst of the multitude of the people that are pressing against Jesus. We see a woman appear, and her burden is a very private burden, okay? Her burden is one, as we read about here, for obvious reasons, is very private, right? And so she decides that she also is going to bring her burden to Jesus. And so she arrives amongst the multitude there, and it gives us a little bit of information about her in the sense that she's had this circumstance, this unfortunate circumstance, for 12 years. We also see that she has spent her livelihood, she spent her money on physicians and has not been able to be healed. She's practically spent everything that she has, every dime that she could possibly gain, she spent it on trying to be healed. And physician after physician after physician has not been able to help her, but that is because none of them are the great physician that Jesus is. None of them. Jesus is the great physician. And so what does she do here? Verse 44 tells us that she came from behind through the group of the people here. And you've probably seen the visual. You've probably seen, there's been many of scenes about this through plays and movies and things of that nature. But she comes up from behind Jesus through the midst of the crowd, and she touches the hem of his garment. She says, if I can just get close enough to touch Jesus. Again, she brings her burden to Jesus. A private burden at that. She had been carrying this burden for some time, for 12 years. Do you notice the resemblance here that she has been dealing with this issue for 12 years, all while we also see Jairus' daughter is 12 years old, right? There's some resemblance there. There's a lot of differences, but there is some resemblance. Hey, 12 years is a long time. 12 years is a long time. Anybody agree to that? I hope you do. She didn't give up. Think about that, church. She didn't give up. Physician after physician. dollar after dollar after dollar, every resource she had, every physician that she could get to for 12 years. And yet, she still brought this burden to Jesus. Most people would have gave up, right? Most people would have said, you know what, I guess I'm just going to live with this the rest of my life. I guess this is just the way of life for me now. Not this woman. She didn't give up. But as you can understand, her situation was very private. That's why we likely see her, instead of being like Jairus at the front of the line here, we see her kind of sneaking through or snaking through the crowd there just to get to where she can touch Jesus. This was a private burden, not because of just the physical situation that was taking place in her life. It didn't just impact her physically only, but it also would have impacted her spiritually, because as Leviticus chapter 15 tells us, that her sickness would have made her ceremonially unclean or unable to participate in religious activities. And so she would have been not only physically impacted, she would have been spiritually impacted as well. And as I mentioned, verse 43 tells us she had spent her entire livelihood. She had done everything she could for physicians, for doctors, to try to be cured. She had done, listen church, she had done everything within her own ability to be healed. And everything that she had wasn't enough. And everything that you have is not enough on your own, by yourself. It's just not. No matter how strong you think you are, no matter how much you think you've been through, no matter what the circumstances are, you by yourself do not have enough power, enough strength, enough wisdom, enough discernment by yourself to get through. She had been dealing with this for 12 years. I'm sure after a while she said, Lord, is it ever going to stop? Lord, is there ever going to be a time where this is not the new normal? But everything she had, she tried it all. But now she gets to bring it to Jesus. And we're going to see what happens when she does bring it to Jesus. Jesus asks, she makes it to Jesus. She works her way through there. She touches the hem of his garment. And then Jesus asks, who touched me? Who was it? He obviously was aware of what was taking place, but that also kind of leads us to believe that she was sneaking through there, because Jesus didn't exactly see her come face front there, face to face, and see what she was doing. So she is coming from and touching the hem, and he says, who touched me? Now there's an opportunity here for her to come to Jesus, and there's an opportunity here for many to see what was going on. And so what takes place here is that after Jesus asked who it was that touched his garment, and her knowing that she had been healed, I can't begin to explain to you what exactly this woman is dealing with here, but I do know that she immediately knew that she was healed. She immediately knew that Jesus had taken care of her situation. And so what does she do? She, as verse 47 says, in the presence of the people. There was many people around. And she declared before them all that she was healed because of Jesus. It says, now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, okay, she was thinking, all right, she was thinking like a lot of us Baptists do right here. Here we go. You ready? I'm gonna sneak in church. I'm going to get me a little Jesus. I'm going to sneak back out. Okay? That's what she was thinking. I'm going to sneak in. I'm going to touch the hem of his garment. I'm going to be healed. I'm going to get back out. Okay? That's exactly, I can promise you, she knew she needed to come to Jesus, but she was thinking, maybe I can drive through Jesus. I can get in there. He can heal me. I can get back out real quick. Maybe no one will ever even see me. But then Jesus says, who touched me? Who touched me? So verse 47 says, now when she come to the point to where she understood she wasn't hidden, she came trembling, right? She came trembling. And what did she do? Falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people, the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. See, she may have had the intention of getting in and getting out and not being seen by anybody, but once Jesus had realized that someone had touched him, he says, who touched me? And she is trembling. She's probably scared. She's probably nervous. But what do we see? She is so, I can't even imagine, I can't even begin through my words to explain to you the joy, the excitement she must have had in that moment. That even though she was trembling, that this situation that she had tried to solve on her own for so long, for so many years, this situation now, Jesus, like that, had taken care of. And so because of that, it says that she had no problem at all. She declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason that she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. The burden that began as a private burden, the burden that began as a part of this woman's life in hopes to keep it amongst herself and to keep it quiet and to keep it hush-hush. Now, because of what Jesus has done, she could not help but to tell the multitudes of the people of what he had done for her. Church, I've asked you this before, and I'll ask you this every time I get a chance to stand behind this pulpit. But when is the last time that you told someone about what Jesus has done in your life? When is the last time that you've told someone about the goodness, the faithfulness that we sung about this morning, that Jesus has shown in your life? Our world is being told a whole lot of things. I mean, it's just, I've told you that before, information overload, right? I mean, we're just crammed with information from a multitude of sources. But nothing can be factual. Nothing can be factual like the information that comes from our Lord. Jesus took this very personal and private burden that this woman had, and he turned it into a public announcement. But not only that, Jesus turned this burden into what we see with our third point this morning. Jesus took this woman's burden and turned it into a past burden. Verse 49 through 56, a past burden. We've seen a public burden with Jairus. We've seen a private burden with the woman. And then Jesus took and created and made her burden a past burden. But not just her burden, also the burden of Jairus as well. Her burden was no more. The weight that she had carried on her shoulders for the past 12 years was no more. It was a thing of the past. Now we focused on this woman for just a moment. Let's go back to Jairus, okay? Think about what Jairus must be thinking by this point. He's thinking, all right, Jesus, my 12-year-old's dying back at home, and you just stop here and help this woman. I mean, come on, Jesus, could you come on a little bit? I mean, I know there's a crowd. Listen, y'all have heard my frustrations with the crowd at Walmart, okay? And Christmas shopping and all that stuff. I thought Christmas was bad, all right? I thought Christmas was bad. I went yesterday, and I tell you, the crowd before the snowpocalypse is way worse than the Christmas crowd, okay? They're crankier, all right? It's more foul. It's unbelievable. The crowd that surrounded Jairus and Jesus here, especially after this public announcement, this woman makes this great announcement of what Jesus has just done. There's a great crowd, and all while Jairus has to be thinking, Jesus, my daughter is dying. Can we get on our way, please? Can we go? Can we get going? I mean, when your daughter is dying, every second, I would imagine, feels like an eternity. And he's thinking, Jesus, we need to get going. I'm sure for a moment it even crossed Jairus' mind that he maybe even wanted to blame this woman for holding him up. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You ever, never mind. I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. You see that right there? That was good. That was good discipline right there. The crowd surrounding him. And then verse 49 happens. The crowd's there, and while he's still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teachers." All while Jairus is probably getting anxious, all while he's probably incredibly impatient by this point, someone comes from his house and says, "Hey, Jairus, don't worry about it. Your daughter's died. She's dead. Don't worry about the rush. Don't worry about hurrying. She didn't make it." Someone brings this terrible news to Jairus. But Jesus says, "I don't think so. Not so fast. You may think that she's dead. You may think she's passed, but she's just sleeping." Verse 52 gives us a glimpse. They continue on, right? And I mean, just think about the walk of faith that this must have taken from Jairus after he's just been told this news. And now he has to take this walk. Now he has to continue on back to his home knowing that he's being told. I mean, think about, listen, this is a great... Jairus is dealing with exactly what we deal with in the world every day today. He's got one side telling him one thing, and he's got Jesus over here telling him another thing, right? Jesus is saying, "No, Jairus, don't worry about it. I'm telling you, come with me, follow me. Just, Jairus, I promise you, when I get to the house, we'll take care of it." "Nope, Jairus, I'm telling you, I just came from the house and she's dead." I mean, is that not exactly what we deal with today? I mean, Jesus is over here trying to instruct us, trying to guide us, trying to lead us. All while it just seems like the world over here is just trying everything it can to just pull us from that. "No, Jairus, you don't have to run. You don't have to worry about it. I'm telling you, I just came from there." And so verse 52 gives us a glimpse of when they arrive back at the house. Jairus, he continues on with going there to Jesus. Jesus tells him in verse 50, he says, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Do not be afraid, only believe. I mean, that statement from Jesus alone is enough. We could just close up and go to the house today. Do not believe. I mean, believe, do not be afraid. Don't be afraid, Jairus. Do not be afraid. I know what they're telling you, Jairus. I know the circumstances doesn't look very good, Jairus. But do not be afraid. Believe. And verse 52 tells us that when they got back to the house here, there was a scene. They were weeping. They were mourning for her. I mean, they show back up to the house. I imagine, everybody's gathered together. They're weeping outside. They're on the front porch there, or whatever they've got, and they're just out there, and everybody's crying. And I mean, it just looks like a somber scene. And here comes Jesus. And Jesus is again telling them. In verse 52, he says, "Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping." Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping. They're all outside crying. They're just like, they're getting to the point to where they're like, "Jesus, I'm telling you, what I see, this little girl has died." It goes on to tell us that they, in verse 53, they ridiculed him. They ridiculed Jesus. They said, "Jesus doesn't know what he's talking about." And why does it say they ridiculed him? Knowing that she was dead. That's a whole lot of our problem today. We know more than Jesus. We think we got it all figured out. You know, it's funny, as I become a parent, my parents told me, "Hey, what you give is what you're going to get later on." Y'all know what I'm talking about? If you're going to be crazy, you're going to get crazy when you become a parent. I thought, no, it can't be. And so I already know what's coming to me because I know how I was. I know it's coming. It's a sad day coming. I understand that. But I always thought, well, I remember being a teenager. I remember the day that I, for the first time, understood that I know more than my parents. Yeah, it's funny, ain't it? At least I thought I did. I thought I knew more than my parents. But I remember I was like, I know this. I know that. I can't tell you when I was growing up how many times those two words come out of my mouth. I know. That's exactly why they ridiculed Jesus right here. Knowing that she was dead. They said, Jesus, I know what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. But I'm telling you, you're wrong. I'm telling you, you're wrong. And they ridiculed him. And we continue to go on. And verse 54, he says, all right, well, if y'all are just gonna believe that, y'all just hang out here on the front porch for just a minute. Let me show you something. Okay? Jesus goes into the house. He goes into the house, and it tells us that he goes in with just Peter, James, and John, the father and the mother. He says, what, if y'all are going to sit here and cry and mourn and weep and not have faith that this little girl is going to be alive, then just sit right here. And me and Peter and James and John, the parents, were going to go in there. And it says, verse 54, that he put all of them outside. He took the girl by the hand and said, arise. Arise. Then it says her spirit returned and she arose, what? Immediately, verse 55 says. Immediately. And he commanded that she be given something to eat. Now, just looking at that on first glance, that may not seem like a very big deal. That, why would Luke write that in there, that she was commanded to be given something to eat? Well, if you'll remember that when Jesus has done this before, okay, with the only son in the middle of the street there, he did the very same thing with him. He commanded that he begin to speak. You might remember that when we looked at that. He said, all right, he raised them up there as they're crossing paths, and he raised that young man up and he commanded him to speak. And here he commands that she be given something to eat. And verse 56 says it all. And her parents were astonished. They were astonished. But he charged them to tell no one. He charged them to tell no one. Now, I asked you a very simple question earlier. When's the last time you told someone about the goodness of what Jesus has done in your life? But here Jesus instructs them to tell no one. And you might say, well, why is that? Wouldn't you want to tell everyone? Wouldn't you be excited that you would just want to shout this from the rooftops? Well, I can tell you this as well, church, that sometimes actions speak louder than words. Listen, they didn't need to say anything, because I can promise you, the moment that 12-year-old little girl stepped outside that house right there, they were going to know exactly what had happened. And they were going to know it wasn't Peter, it wasn't James, it wasn't John, it wasn't the mother, it wasn't the father. It was Jesus. Her walking outside was going to do all the talking that needed to be said. Immediately she arose. Verse 44, you remember the woman? Her blood flow stopped immediately. Two very different instances here with two very different burdens. Jairus was a leader of the Jewish man. This woman was anonymous. We're not even told her name. We don't even know who she is. And Jairus, everyone knew who Jairus was. Jairus was a leader of the synagogue. This woman would have been ceremonially unclean and kept from worship. Jairus came with a plea for his daughter. This woman had a burden for herself. Jairus was likely a wealthy man and had a public status, while this woman likely had no money because she spent it all trying to find a cure. Jairus was blessed with 12 years of joy with his daughter and now might lose her. This woman was dealing with 12 years of misery and was hoping for a healing. Church, I want to remind you this morning, and I'm closing with this. Jesus is the only one that can mend the brokenness that is created by a burden in your life. He's the only one. I've seen people carry burdens and it physically kill them. I've seen people have burdens in their life and it drive them to the point of craziness because of burdens that they try to carry themselves, when for so long they should have just brought that burden to Jesus to begin with. He's the only one that can mend the brokenness that's created by your burden. Regardless of who you are, regardless of what your background is, regardless if you're the most public of people and public figure possible, or regardless if you're anonymous and no one even knows who you are, but you're just another person in the crowd. Church, I want to encourage you this morning as well, before we go into a time of invitation. Don't feel isolated by your burdens. That person that you know that has it all together, they have burdens. That person that you know that doesn't look like you, that doesn't talk like you, that doesn't have the same upbringing or the same blessings that you have in your life, they have burdens. Church, is there a burden in your life today? If there is, I'm going to plead with you to bring it to Jesus. Heads bowed, eyes closed this morning. Bring it to Jesus this morning. He's the only one that can make it right. Maybe you're here